Chess YouTube, welcome back. This right here is the Armageddon game that Arjun, Erigaisi, and Hikaru Nakamura just played in round 5 of the 2025 Norway Chess Tournament. This game by Arjun, both players, but really Arjun here. This was an absolute masterclass in the Queen's Gambit. You don't want to miss this right here. The ending was just the ending was so good. All right, in the game, one knight f3, Arjun. Now Hikaru, d5, then c4. Okay, interesting move, giving black the option of going d4 if he wants it. Hikaru, he does not want it. He goes e6. And now d4, Arjun transposing back to a 1d4 opening, achieving it via a slightly unusual move order, but we achieved the Queen's Gambit declined all the same. All right, now Hikaru, knight f6. And here, Arjun, he's a big fan of the line where you take on d5, then go knight c3, avoiding certain black responses, but instead in the game, he actually goes knight c3 straight away, knight c3. This is quite unusual for Arjun. He doesn't really like these fully mainstream 1d4 openings. He tends to play more sidelines, but here Arjun playing the absolute main line of 1d4 essentially these days. All right, now, black. Which line will Hikaru go for? Black has a million options. The main lines here include bishop e7, bishop b4, c5, and c6, but there certainly are a lot of other lines as well. And here Hikaru plays maybe the most combative option for black if you're playing for a win. That is the move a6. This right here is a line that Magnus Carlsen himself has made a living off of as black. The idea is you're basically maintaining the tension and threatening d takes c4 and then b5. Now here Arjun, he takes on d5, that is the main line. Black takes back. We now have a Carlsbad pawn structure where white is missing the c pawn and black is missing the e pawn. One of the most interesting and fascinating and important pawn structures in all of chess. Now here, the real key in the Carlsbad for white is you have to get this bishop on c1 outside the pawn chain before you go e3. If you go e3 right away, you have no advantage and you're even at risk of being worse. But if you bring it out to say f4 or g5 right away, you're doing pretty well. Now here, the main line is bishop g5, but instead Arjun plays bishop f4. Okay, very interesting. Maintaining the tension a little more. Now Hikaru, c6. Reinforcing his pawn on d5, a very typical idea in the Carlsbad pawn structure, but not necessarily in this exact position. Instead, bishop d6 right away is a little more common. All right, now here, Arjun e3, and black, sure enough, does go bishop d6. All right, now here, what should white be doing? Well, you can trade on at d6. You can go to g5. You can also go to g3, and you can also ignore the bishop and just go bishop d3, allowing black to capture on f4. You would take back with the e-pawn. All of these ideas are playable here. In the game, Arjun, he takes on d6. Black takes back with the queen. And then we have queen to c2. All right, white setting up the queen and bishop battery and getting the queen to a good square on the c-file. Now we have knight b d7, bishop d3, castles, and castles. So here, the opening phase of the game is pretty much over. White has fully completed development. His rooks are connected. Meanwhile, black is pretty close. It's not really obvious where the bishop on c8 will be going, so black is pretty much there as well. So what are the plans for both sides in this pawn structure? Well, for white has three main ideas. One is playing for a fast e4 break. 2 is playing for knight e5 and f4 ideas, the classical Pillsbury attack. And 3, the safest option and maybe the strongest option here is going to be rook b1, intending b4, a4, b5, the so-called minority attack, because white is attacking with the queenside pawn minority, those being the a and b pawns, with the intention of creating weaknesses in the black camp. Now, black, on the other hand, is likely going to defend on the queen side and maybe clamp down on e4 and maybe start an attack on the king side with h5 and g5 ideas. All right, here, black, rook to e8 is the move. White goes rook a b1, again intending b4, a4, b5, the classical minority attack. And here black goes a5, clamping down on b4, stopping b4 ideas right away. If white goes b4, black just takes, and then black has tremendous pressure on the a file, and white's pawn structure is a little bit worse. So you can't really allow that. Now, Arjun h3 is the move, stopping future knight g4 ideas, a decent move. And here, Hikaru makes maybe the first mistake of the game. He's played very, very well so far, and he makes a move that, honestly, this kind of surprises me looking at the game. He plays this move b6. Now, this move b6 is typically not a move you want to make in this pawn structure. Instead, you usually leave the pawn on b7, or you go straight to b5, potentially intending b4. But b6 is not really a square you want this pawn on in general. And there are a few reasons, but the biggest one is when black goes b6 like this, white can simply crash through with the move e4, and it turns out this is very, very strong in this position. But Arjun, he's not going for it. He's sticking to his plan. Rook fc1. He slides the rook over. By far the best square for the rook if you're going for the minority attack with, say, a3, b4, and so on. Now, Hikaru, bishop b7. Not a bad square for the bishop, and black may be intending c5 soon. So overall, there's some logic here. Arjun a3, intending b4, and black, sure enough, c5 immediately. Now we have this really significant tension with the pawns on d4 and c5. What is white going to do about it? Well, he ignores it and instead jumps into b5 with the bishop. This is the drawback of the move c5. You do weaken the b5 square, and white here simply jumps in immediately and crashes through and pins the knight on d7 to the rook on e8 to boot. All right, now black, rook ec8, getting out of that pin. White goes rook to d1. Curious looking move. The idea is if you take on c5 later, then you do have some tension on the queen on d6 via the x-ray attack. So a decent idea. Black goes knight f8, trying to find a better square for that knight. It may go to either e6 or g6. Both of those squares should be okay for the knight here. And now we have queen to f5. The queen jumping in and putting more pressure on that pawn on d5. Now keep in mind, white is threatening d takes c5, at which point white will have 1, 2, 3 attackers on d5. The pressure certainly is piling up here. All right, black, queen to e7 is the move. We have knight to a4. The knight jumps out and pressures both b6 and c5. Certainly a good idea. Black goes bishop to c6, offering the trade of bishops. And this is a position where there is so much tension. I mean, the bishops are doing this dance. The pawn on b6 is undefended. The pawn on c5 can be taken. This is really a point in the game where you want to slow down and calculate everything all the way out. And Arjun, I mean, being an Armageddon game, having only 10 minutes to make all of his moves, he doesn't quite find the most precise continuation. Here he plays one of the obvious moves, knight takes b6. I mean, how could this be a bad idea? You win the pawn, you fork the rooks, and so on. But it turns out taking on c6 first was a little bit more precise. The lines are complicated, but in the end, white can take on c6, take on c5, and have way, way too much pressure on the pawn on d5. Instead, knight takes b6 chosen in the game with the fork on the rooks. Now we have bishop takes b5, then knight takes c8, and then here, of course, you can't take the knight, as then white wins the rook. Instead, queen to c7 is chosen, and the knight is effectively trapped. Anywhere it goes, it will be captured by the queen or perhaps the rook. Now here, Arjun, d takes c5 is chosen. We have rook takes c8, and then rook dc1. The rook slides back over, and very importantly, white had the option of going rook bc1. Instead, he went rook dc1, indicating he's likely going to go b4 later in the game. Otherwise, having the rook on b1 doesn't make any sense. So that is Arjun kind of giving away his plan a little bit here. And Hikaru, he spots this, and he says, you know what? I don't like the idea of you going b4. b4 is very good for you, so instead, I'm going to go a4, clamping down on the b3 square. And of course, if white ever goes b4 now, then black can capture on the diagonal with the move en passant, capturing that pawn right there. So, Hikaru getting a nice little bind on the queen side. Of course, all is not lost. Arjun still has the very strong pass pawn on c5. He's got a good square on d4 for his knight, which would pressure the bishop. Overall, Arjun is still a tiny bit better. He's got good pressure. He's temporarily up the pawn. The pawn on d5 is weak, and so on. But again, Hikaru is doing pretty okay as well. Now, here, it turns out the best way to proceed as white, and this is actually pretty important, is b4. You accept that black takes on b3 like this, and you take back with the rook, and it turns out, even though black gets rid of his pawn, even though you have the weak pawns on a3 and c5, White has so much pressure, and these pawns are so dangerous, it's still good for white. Instead, in the game, Arjun goes knight d4, a logical move, jumping in with the knight and pressuring the bishop on b5. But here, black goes bishop c4, jumping down with the bishop, and he's doing pretty okay. Now, Arjun, c6 is the move, pushing his pawn up. Of course, with the bishop here on c4, this pawn is vulnerable. Therefore, Arjun, he has to go c6, getting that pawn defended by the knight. Now, here, Hikaru, he continues developing. Knight g6. We have queen c2. The queen flies back to the c2 square from where it began, and then queen to a7. The queen slides over and therefore defends the a4 pawn that was under attack by the queen. Now we have queen c3. The queen slides up and gains access to some more squares here. For example, b4. Black goes knight to e7, increasing the pressure on the pawn on c6. Now Arjun, he's got to find a way to increase the pressure here. What is it going to be? It turns out, again, b4 is the right idea. Again, you allow black to capture on b3, en passant, but it all works out in the end for you. Instead, he goes for this move, rook to d1. And this is such an important move in terms of the course of the game. This move right here, the computer absolutely hates it. I mean, it really, really, really does not like this move, rook d1. And this is the sort of move where I wish I was 500 points higher in online chess and I could fully understand what this move is all about. I'm currently rated in the high 1800s in Blitz on chess.com and low 2000s on Rapid. And this is the kind of move that really, really rocks my brain. Why does the computer not like this? And I've tried to figure it out. I've tried using it, and I just can't quite figure this out. My best guess is that the rook is just a little bit better placed on c1, and overall, white is wasting a tempo to move his rook to a slightly worse square. Yes, it does pressure d5, but for whatever reason, the computer really doesn't like this. All right, black. h6 is the move. We have rook bc1, Arjun sliding his other rook over, and then knight to e4. The knight jumps in and pressures the queen on c3. Now the queen drops back. Queen to e1 is the move. We have knight takes c6, gobbling up that pawn on the c6 square, and then knight to f5. The knight jumps in and pressures squares like g7, d6, and so on. That knight is quite dangerous. It's not really targeting a whole lot yet, but it could in the future. Now here, black goes knight e7, offering the knight trade. And here, white accepts. We have knight takes, queen takes, and then here in this position, Arjun has the really simple tactical shot to win a pawn. That is just rook takes d5. The point being, if black takes, you take on c8, and white is doing great. Now, I assume Arjun and Erigaisi saw this. This is not a complicated tactic, and he didn't go for it. Instead, he went rook d4. And the reason I think he went for this is an Armageddon game. If he just wins the pawn on d5, black is getting closer and closer to a draw. And again, in Armageddon, white has to win. If he draws, he loses all the points that are up for grabs in the Armageddon game. So I think Arjun was trying to keep the game as complicated as possible. That is my best guess. Maybe you know Arjun better than I do. Maybe you can fill me in what the logic was there. Or maybe you're just higher rated and you just know more things than I do right now. Could be the case. All right, black, rook b8, attacking the pawn on the b2 square. Now we have rook c2, defending the pawn, and then rook to b6. The rook slides up and gains access to some squares on the 6th rank, so not a bad idea at all. Now white, queen to a5, attacks the rook on b6. We have rook to a6, pressures the queen on a5. Queen to e1, it slides back. And then sure enough, rook g6. The rook finding a very active square on g6, pressuring the g2 pawn. Now we have queen d1, queen g5, Hikaru, the cheeky checkmate threat in 1. Queen to f3 defends the checkmate threat. There is no mate in 1 in this game. Then bishop b3 attacks the rook on c2. Rook c8 hits the king. King to h7 is virtually forced, so king h7. And then h4. The h-pawn enters the game. Prince Harry, the h-pawn, has mobilized, pressures the queen. And what is the idea? Well, here, Arjun, he's trying to distract the queen a little bit. The point is, he wants to capture on f7, but if you do it right away, right here, you get checkmated. So, h4 is sort of a deflection move, trying to deflect the queen to h4, at which point he would take on f7 without getting checkmated. And that is what happens. queen takes, queen takes. Both sides win a pawn here. And believe it or not, Arjun is starting to get some checkmate threats. For example, if he had 2 free moves, then queen to f8 and then h8 would be mate. Of course, black is not going to fall for that, but there are some threats here. All right, in this position, Hikaru, as you can see by the eval bar, I mean, just collapsing here, black is effectively winning because this idea of gobbling up this pawn, it loses to a very precise series of tactical blows. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the absolutely astonishing idea for black right here. This one is a shocker. Again, if you like puzzles, this is your time to shine. The move for Hikaru here is rook takes g2, giving up the rook, a clean rook sacrifice. And the point is, the remaining knight and queen gang up on the king and create some incredible threats. I'm not going to analyze all of it right here, but if you like analyzing lines on your own, that is certainly the line to analyze from this game. All right. Instead, here, Hikaru, rook to f6 is the move. He targets the queen, but this is not as strong. Queen g8 hits the king on the h7 square. Then we have king g6, and then g3 attacks the queen. Queen g4, then rook c7. And Arjun, out of nowhere, is suddenly effectively winning. He has so many threats here. King to h5. Now Arjun, rook takes g7, gobbling up that pawn and attacking the queen. We have rook g6 defending, and then queen to f7 pins the rook on g6 to the king on the h4 square. What is happening here? All right, bishop c4, the bishop goes back up, and then rook takes g6, queen takes, and Arjun, the finishing blow of this game is this move g4. What a move. The point being, if you take the pawn, you lose the queen. If you go to g5 like this, then f4 is going to force king takes or king h4. Again, either way, you lose the queen. So here, in this position, on move 48, Hikaru is forced to resign to the Indian superstar Arjun Erigaisi as he is just losing his queen. Wow, what an Armageddon game played between Arjun Erigaisi and Hikaru in round 5 of the 2025 Norway Chess Tournament. This is a really fabulous game. I mean, this game plus the classical game from round 5 between these two players featuring Arjun and Hikaru was also amazing. You can see it, earlier today on my YouTube channel. This came out on a Sunday. This is just really fascinating stuff. All right, Chess YouTube, comment down below what you thought of the game. Feel free to comment a big capital A to support Arjun. If you're an Arjun fan, comment a capital A down below to show your support. Smash that like button. And as always, I wish you the very best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And I'll see you in the next video.